Greetings. Today we're going to examine how some falsely and artificially manufactured media memes can gain a lot of traction and create a lot of miseducation about core fundamental concepts, no matter what the subject. In this case, the subject is the world economy and global economic forces, and the topic that created so much misinformation about that is the rather peculiar acronym of BRIC, B-R-I-C, meant to represent four large countries that were supposedly emerging markets because they were not advanced economies: Brazil, Russia, India, China, BRIC, BRIC. Now, the person who made this acronym, and we'll talk about him in a little bit, somehow chose the acronym BRIC when he could have used those four letters to create the acronym CRIB, which is in fact a real word in the English language. But he chose BRIC because that was catchy for some reason. So these are the four countries in question. Ignore South Africa over here. I'll talk about that as a small footnote. But BRIC, four big countries emerging, supposedly similar to each other, so artificially grouped together in a bucket. Now, the BRIC website indicates that the person who created the concept, his name is Jim O'Neill, and let's examine him for a little bit. Jim O'Neill, Baron O'Neill of Gatley, so someone who's part of the British aristocracy. The fact that he's an economist shouldn't surprise you. They have no shortage of bad ideas, but he isn't an economist who was just in academia his whole life. He actually was a high-ranking person at Goldman Sachs and a member of the conservative government in Britain, and very much a member of the British aristocracy. Now, you would think that someone like this would know more about the complexity of the global economy. One would expect an oversimplified notion like BRIC to emerge from an American economist who sees the whole world in an oversimplified way and doesn't really understand the differences and the complexities between all those countries. But in this case, it happened to be from a British aristocrat who's also an economist. And to be completely fair, maybe he's much smarter than the people who bought the idea from him, and he just knew that he could package something in an oversimplified way and increase his profile. It's possible he himself actually knows better, to be completely fair. But let me show you why this grouping is unusually bad. And remember, he came up with it in 2001, so let's go back to what the world was like in 2001 and see why he felt that it was natural to group these four very unrelated countries together. Now, from Google, we see the gross domestic product chart of these four countries in question, and we start from 2000, so that is when Mr. O'Neill, or Baron O'Neill, sorry, was thinking about these four countries as being similar and somehow on a uniform growth trajectory. Now look at how different history turned out. And this chart only goes up to 2018 in Google, not any further, but suffices for our purposes over here. The four were perhaps somewhat similar in size on this linear scale. China was the biggest, but not by much. China completely left the other three in the dust. The other three have really not moved much at all. India has grown, but not to a degree that it has left the other two behind. Brazil and Russia really have not grown much at all economically over this 18-year period, and that continues to be true even through 2021. China has left all the others in the dust. What this has taught us about the world economy, that this concept of convergence and leapfrogging is a myth. Of these four countries, only one was one that was recovering from a political system that was substantially devaluing the human capital of that country. The other three were not under a political system that was holding their population's human capital back. Even Russia, or whatever you may think about it, was not really holding its population back in an economic sense, because this was long after the Cold War and it can be attributed to that. China left all the others in the dust completely, is close to being a superpower, while these other three have really not increased their weight in the world by any significant degree at all relative to 2000. Now, what's even worse about grouping these four countries together is that Brazil and Russia are commodity exporters. They sell oil. They benefit when the price of oil is high, whereas India and China are oil importers. They benefit when the price of oil is low. Therefore, what benefits Brazil and Russia the most actually harms China and India the most, and the price of oil was very high from 2007 to 2014, a window of time that is included in this chart. But after oil plunged steeply and permanently in 2014, the economies of Brazil and Russia went down and are yet to even regain their previous highs, whereas China and India got a huge tailwind. China was able to make more of it than India did, but nonetheless, to group these four together when two of them benefit from exactly what harms the other two and vice versa is just really quite strange. But the acronym was catchy, BRIC, BRIC. Therefore, this was used by the media for a very long time, and only just now has kind of been going away because the absurdity of grouping together these three non-performing countries with China is really not appropriate at all. It is very much a story of which of these is not like the other three. Luckily, this acronym is now being retired because of how inadequate it was in the first place. But even that's not the whole story. As you saw in the beginning, there was an acronym called BRICS. What does S stand for? South Africa. Why? Because South Africa, the number 35 economy in the world, much smaller than even India, Brazil, and Russia, demanded to be included in this acronym. Why? Because it wanted to represent its continent. Now, why is that important? Nobody knows, but South Africa is way, way, way too small to be in any such group. It's actually the number 35 economy in the entire world, whereas at least India, Brazil, and Russia are all still among the top 10. And frankly, South Africa, like many other African countries, have become vassal states of China in that China dominates their entire economy, buys their exports, and is engaged in a lot of resource extraction and other activity in Africa. So that was the history of the BRIC acronym. A lot of people memorized that and wanted to sound intellectual by talking about it at their cocktail parties or to appear knowledgeable on the cheap about the global economy, but it was really quite uninformed. Brazil and Russia just have not grown economically. India grew somewhat, but it was starting from by far the lowest base of the four countries and is still the poorest of the four. China is the only one that truly transformed its economy to a scale of rising up the rankings of world GDP per capita and total GDP so completely. If one were to summarize in one sentence what about the world economy country rankings in 1992 versus 2021 is different, China is the only large country that has substantially improved its ranking. Almost no other large country has changed its ranking by any significant degree between 1992 and present. The rise of China is really the only major country ranking change in the world over the last nearly 30 years. In the case of Brazil and Russia, despite their middle income status, they have not been able to reduce their dependency on oil exports. Even after all this time, even though Russia has a tremendous number of highly educated people, it has not been able to move its economy away from an oil exporting core. Same with Brazil. A lot of other factors in its favor, but it has not been able to move away from being a commodity exporter. India, a place of inexpensive labor, but not really enough human capital to uplift its entire economy. You may hear about India having 4 million software engineers doing some type of software work, but 4 million is not enough to uplift a country of 1.4 billion people. India's economy does grow, but it does not grow very fast. It is certainly not in China's league and will never be able to catch up with China, and I've done an entire video about that, which you'll see in this tag above. So that was just the primary thought of this video. The lesson is to not be swayed by catchy media memes, because usually these are oversimplified and are not made from a basis of true fundamental knowledge at all, and therefore spread a lot of miseducation and lead to a lot of intellectual emptiness even in policy circles across the world. I mean, there have been BRIC conferences all over the world. A lot of those BRIC conferences are going away because China is really bigger than the other three combined, as you can see from this chart over here. I hope you found this video informative. If you like this type of content, I encourage you to upvote this video and subscribe to this channel. Thank you for watching.